first climate change has already happened, will continue for foreseeable future. Katrina and Sandy showed how abandoned population will continue to be devastated by government abandonment of its infrastructure. These disasters create a moment for political change that must be stolen. And 12 first world had decided to invested would need to face the danger to return back to the country, keep its chance of failing. And infrastructure riches by poverty, heating, which will be stronger, melting ice, and raising seals, the breaking powder of the third. We always had infrastructure. The third was one of the form of Sandy global needs to old rules on the planet. Doing it is going to afford far more expensive than doing something the store brought to light how many people were barely getting by kindness while they are nutrient can ameliorate catastrophe, but it can't prevent what it is and the kind of power it takes to pump out a drowned subway system or rebuild railroad. There is a role for government disaster from mobilizing forces of temperature raise 1 degree Celsius. It's going to get hotter. Disaster produces disaster become a national policy. We invite it and it directs it becomes impossible to distinguish natural disaster from man-made calamity. There is no difference anymore, but we can't prevent the worst thing impacting all ways from evacuation. Second, the national security state turned the American city into a site of military securitization, abandoning the funding for needed infrastructure and research to make urban areas less vulnerable to climate change. Graham and five, Katrina produced one of the worst and the rhetoric since has emphasized terrorist with legitimate military predators that the natural events have been undermined because of physical conditions, homeland security. These budgets and programs are about urban security. The business and suitability of cities is downplayed. The aggressive paradigm seeks to encompass interest in events for combat operation about the mitigation of homeland security has been achieved through cuts in urban funding resources, have ensured essential infrastructure, making such cuts bring an increase in the climate change, rising temperatures and sea level rise, but because the truths received from discourse of the war on terror, they've been increasingly ignored until Katrina such a policy shift contributed to the scale of devastation of Katrina that led to the abandonment of research policy tracing dynamics. Hurricane Bryce and in New Orleans, FEMA was a shadow of this for itself because the country ordered the federal distress mitigation to be dealt with at scale, but states suffering huge deficits because and reduced national support have been unable to replicate services. The denial on terror attack with the ride, urban, anti-urbanism, and anti-public service those must be contributed to a growing vulnerability of U.S. cities to catastrophic weather insights and the contention too is disposability. The willful lack of U.S. disaster preparedness is a crucial aspect of interior colonization. The state's only function becomes militarizing these zones of sacrifice justified by the current narratives of disaster fallout that make a media spectacle of suffering and chaos and sensational tours of the disasters don't cover over mundane violence of economies, blackness, attack, Angelo, and attack Katrina made visible attention with the U.S. provided went into a complicated relation neo-colonial colonization. Katrina punctured democracy and avoided exposed imperial sovereignty, colonies, and power, obsolete new colonial capitalism requires the summoning of specific geopolitical economics call forth ecological corporate disaster to intertwine economics. Katrina's deadly effects were not arbitrary. This moment, its aftermath, were paradigmatic U.S. reference early colonization and was the product of a consolidated racial and geographic regime circling through economies like this. The New Orleans has already been marked as a disaster long before Katrina emerged on the world stage. Disaster necessitated the massive contamination, liquidation of black bodies, and neo-imperialism, the abandonment of brown land and poor white people experiencing Katrina were a constant colony with, and when bodies are produced as non-human without ongoing terror, murder, disappearance of them are structural impossibility. The logical spatial transformation within the state of stage black is already corpse of spatial war never happened to dominant privately. Dominant practice about hurricane terrain to make possible economies black no surface that morph their terrain through internal action and amnesty. These practices resolve the structural destruction of indirect value. Katrina problems society, social inequality, poverty made visible. The belated arrival of the federal government came not in the form of food or water, but military hardware and mobilization. You can either privatize or else corpses were as in residents asked their leaders for food, water, and shelter. The government refused and insulted resident poor sick elderly residents of the state because they had no means of escape. They were the state, the way the state mobilized the news for further internal restructuring of peripheries and to a point to fantasia that social actors have regarded disruption accidents, disasters. Now within economies of blackness, certain bodies become by definition accidental bodies that through the winds of natural disasters and corporate exploitation. These processes of wearing down and destruction undergird the structure of white religion, American spatially segregated death zones. The disaster has always already happened. I can Angelo and 10 for people close to the state emergent progress is the zone of morbidity and death. The zone where native lives are not complementary to the zone inhabited by set of zones produce two species. One ontologically able to assume and whereas the other so there's assumed superfluously disaster black suffer a relation to U.S. empires and Syria nor neither subjects nor side push seem to consider progress as relegating the lives and accidental one's corporations. This revealed the structural and ontological possibility and fraud driven people in order for private capital to restructure and regain and appropriate their flesh and ecologies to construct itself anew. Now how unless we attack the underlying spatial logic and disposability, every coming disaster is another opportunity for neo-colonial powers to militarize certain populations marked for death and invisibilize the process. Instead of lurching from one crisis to the next, we must recognize economies of blackness because the disaster is here and the disaster is now with Angelo intent. Moments of environmental accidental and limit people's economic vitality contest the conditions of their existential extermination. These bodies are terrorized and colonized are integral to and foundation to the product of neo-imperialism. Large property brought to disaster engagement with politics made possible due to conditions from which they emerge, including relations to capital politics made invisible to disaster and reproducing invisibility of neo-colonial imperial projects. Any violence such as their segregation, exploitation, extraction, profits, and deaths are justified. How such disasters include in the existence of living, they have become crucial for the definition of politics, life, and death. Now mobility has become a zero-sum game game. Our security comes at the expense of those left behind. We know that we have made it because we can watch them die. This derealization of certain lives is the condition of possibility for violence and unceasing murder against racially and sexually apparent others that can't at all. And to reconcile the requires space being well destroying others, creating and liquidating entities, offering a solution for fear of violence is required to maintain its mirage, to deal with insecurity. The demolition of racially apparent must be performed safe pleasure, its continual protection. The illicit spurs always rely on honesty, non-promises. There are always bodies, non-subjects that become, that serves the raw material for this process, whose deaths become the grounding on which spectacularized murder becomes possible. Thus, we claim the United States federal government should invest in adapting its transportation infrastructure and climate change. The contention 3 is the politics of disaster. The denial of adaptive infrastructure is a calculated denial of political participation in self ad hoc and militarized disaster response. Ensure disposable populations cannot radically organize and let only the plan allows community resistance to mass violence by upending the hierarchy of transportation mobility. Adams and 6, the political instability that constitute the city would be removed from the open space of neighborhood where they were might well organize themselves. This would have immediately deepened the crisis of legitimacy. The exodus to the close-off military network, networld of the Superdome revealed its track was filled not with the vectors of rapid move, but with the spectacle of demobilized bodies, thousands who could have been simply perished. Amount of stratification work at the speed of light stasis in New Orleans Superdome contrasted markedly with the obligation to movement on the highways, those smooth surfaces and high-risk speeds that enable the sensation of the nation. Now access to speed and mobility is inevitable and structuring condition of the political. Your ballot has to address those differences and democratize speed to have any hope of subverting zones to sacrifice Connolly and 2. The nostalgia for comforting lines of expressing anxiety about security, mortality, and emancipating moral boundaries that spend from heart from there to the intellectual, the ambiguous relation, time, place, fear, plurality, democracy, the asymmetries between different zones of time and capabilities of that very says they should make attempt into a dangerous reactive response into a series of familiar political movements, slow down and conceal the rift. Such a reactive to non-global innocence, capital intervention, resentment against the acceleration piece become productive of national demise to identify a series of vulnerable constituencies and paradigmatic enemies in culture of the Christian civilization. The underlying enemy is fear and uncertainty, but it is difficult to grab hold of the capitalist system in which these processes are set. It now becomes possible to come to terms with this condition in a more affirmative way. Now, finally, we must interrupt the material effective economies in which certain bodies black, brown, and poor are given over to death. Their existential extermination, just waiting for actualization. The 1AC spatial rearticulation of disaster, redistribution of vulnerability, and ending of the cycle of continuous killing by sacrifice is a necessary starting point for any politics beyond necro-capitalism and Angelo 10. A spatial theory of disaster requires disruption of dominant articulation between events that serve political, economic, function struggle over how accidents and disasters are understood, are linked to projects that share epistemology. Accidents and disaster are imminent production of neo-imperial, colonial order, neoliberal shifts to make bodies in the way the process of giants and the death constitute the ontological subsidy in the creation of white body and an economy of blackness and bodies. Anatopolitics and necroeconomics as two sides of the same coin, where maintenance of the neoliberal order rests in the chronic state of what's the stakes are the ultimate safety that black bodies are ontologically impossible. It is time to systematically disrupt these violences by redirecting our attention to those activities and sites of social ontological contestation to shape and form projects that simultaneously affirm as a social, co-substantial, and temporarily non-transferable subjects whose desires are now revolutionary.
You'll defend the hypothetical backbone of the plan?
I don't know what that means.
You'll defend that it happens by the USFG?
Sure.
Awesome. Why political?
What do you mean?
Why political? Why take a political approach?
Why do we use the state?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, the Adams evidence makes a really good argument. It says that only by using the state, well, the way Katrina played out is that the federal government created a zone of sacrifice and a zone of chaos where federal intervention was seen as necessary to stop the chaos from occurring. They then moved these communities that were adversely affected to the Superdome in order to stop them from forming a coalition.
So they moved them to a Superdome. You moved them to a different city. What's the difference?
No, not right. The reason they moved them to the Superdome is so that they can monitor them to ensure that they don't radically organize. The plan stops that.
So the plan stops monitoring by the federal government?
No, the plan allows them to radically organize.
So
by
you read this piece of academic evidence that
transportation
says the way that we articulate disasters matters. Why is that true?
What do you mean?
Why does it matter the way that we articulate disasters?
Sure, because there's a difference between framing it as a natural disaster that happens once and then a systematic failure of the USFG.
Sure. If
There's
that's
a
true,
difference
then
between Hurricane Katrina
my question
and
is,
Hurricane
if a
Hooch.
hurricane happens after our resilient infrastructure is implemented, is it still a disaster?
Well, our argument, it's not okay, there's a I guess I'm kind of confused with your question.
If a hurricane happens after our infrastructure
It is not a
resilient,
calculated
is it
federal
a disaster?
It doesn't
So
disproportionately affect zones,
it's not a
spatially
disaster.
segregated
Awesome.
dead zones.
If
I mean,
it's
that's not
true,
the answer to the question.
Okay, one piece of evidence that you've read, the text says instead of lurching from one crisis to another, it It seems like this is like really what the AF does. It's
Not
moving
at
from
all.
one crisis
The
point
piece,
to
I think
another.
you read this against the last team you debated. The argument they made is that in what happened, yes, Agatha Angelou says that right now it is viewed as a single event, Katrina, then Sandy, and then
Sure.
whatever comes next. Our argument is that we have to stop visualizing them
And if
as
it's true that
single events, but rather
neoliberalism is the
systemic.
disaster, yeah, if
Sure.
neoliberalism is the disaster, how does building resilient infrastructure stop neoliberalism?
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't think the 1AC claims to disrupt all forms of neoliberalism.
Oh,
but
sure.
1AC is a good starting point for that. The Adams evidence indicates that only by allowing these communities whose voices have been suppressed, who have been oppressed by the federal government to radically organize,
but clearly
if they
you
choose
can't
to
do anything
so.
about that, right? This is just
I
a
don't
debate
understand
round.
what you mean.
This is just a debate round.
Sure.
Your first
No,
advantage is like
good
reps
point.
about disasters
No,
matter.
no.
The second one is like coalitions that people build
You're
onto their
just
individual
speaking, no,
own
that's
matters.
not the argument we're going to make. The Agatha Angelou evidence indicates that by bringing to light these economies of blackness and to bringing to light like the fact that the disaster is systemic, oncurring, always
So,
ongoing, we can...
To be clear, that part is only about the way that we articulate disaster. What has to do with the plan? What solvency arguments do you have of
understand.
just the plan? You're right, you said the way that we articulate disasters opens up spaces for...
Right, the Adams
black
evidence
communities.
indicates that they need to be able to transport themselves. Like if another Hurricane Katrina comes, they're going to be stuck in the Superdome unless we do the plan. Or they're going to die.
It's 4 off than disposability. It's your water station.
Oh, yeah. You said 4 and then disposability, like the second advantage?
Just, yeah, that. Anastasia, when you're done
Yes.
loading it, could I get it, please? Four. Actually, 22. 22.
Is your mom?
Will is.
Oh,
Hold on 1 second. There's 1 NC round 1. Or round NC round 3. Yeah. Much better name for it. Otherwise I steal it. And it's always great evidence. It's just not fair.
Yeah, it's not great. Aww. Okay, is everybody good?
First off, immigration will pass out with PC's key if P2 with 425 on the list of which are driving the immigration overall even the capital immigration reform take a little longer to hope that Obama saying huge political capital in the effort to pass the comprehensive immigration reform though the issue reason government Obama seeking to believe about support immigration reform and now the plan drains capital free market 2012 to be a year to which application in the face just congressional opposition Obama failed to do with new spending on transportation these suggestions but the working reality to believe our system once you list of what a positive possible decision our current system makes the system is rooted in racist exclusion makes violence and both violence possible veils quiz in 92 nationalism right more to exclude immigrants as a better quality of the nation as a fixed quantity of job national borders have become an obstacle to saving the preserving the needs these giving by opening up our borders the artificial nature of borders implies that they cannot confer any citizen natural more about exclusive policy cannot be based on cover racial argument to the claims that they generally more rights to exclude whoever they want next up is the disaster critique. The verification of the disaster represents we need to secure ourselves from the force of nature that alienation from nature represents a new normal fracking drilling warming sovereign debt inequality of consumption planetary exchange and Cohen in 12 systems completely creating out of control the new system is zero disaster economic and non ecological they're testifying separate market the satisfaction of the hyperwealth corporate is This is the state occupied the solid eruption. The lost 21st century state portrayed the time bubble Jefferson. The seem to practice the TV models, corresponding to the structural bonds of the conjunctive natural cause and energy sees. That the collapse of the attention that any part of the box with this. Therefore, the cover the irreversible mutation. This has been characterized by an unfold ecological ancestor. The logical pieces of the orcas of here. A bonds seem to be in the CCS. The figure of the ecology wants to be saved and precludes it from compounding the submission and disposition, which alter the condition of the production of the including the production of elements memory regimes have been totally anonymously along the conjunction of elements security in the epistemological sense of being secured decordation. These systems of security having the which is echo catastrophic imaginary security has been accomplished in the production of political agents, the acceleration strategies of the questions of memorized fixation, the cultural history, the enhancements of activity deferred to addressing the whole of the biosphere collapse. Now, even if they win that their representations are good, their approach to stopping the disaster rooted in shock doctrine that fixing and rebuilding their temporary erase disaster will fail and recreate the structures that they criticize, climb 7 most people survive disaster, want to oppose opposite of clean state. They want to salvage whatever they can and begin repairing. They want to bring from their relatedness disaster capitalism, no intention of repairing and our too long to do all things that reconstruct to be able to finish the job of reelection was not very recent. What was left of the public sphere and breeding community then quickly moved west into the kind of corporate news Jerusalem and the new still government capitalism here and sort of capitalism for new forward the same ideological program with being imposed by the classic of natural disaster from the exploding crisis the fundamental form of capitalism New Orleans would not experience rather experiencing the shock doctrine in Argentina in the 70s. The U.S. appearance was 30,000 people was integral to the imposition of Chicago the school policies in China in 1889 was a shock in Tiananmen that covered much of the country's only expression in Russia in 1993 the Falklands War in 1982 the atmosphere of large scale crisis provided a necessary pretext for overrule the expression which of the which have in the country economic side of crest the market creation company the public pressure where very force attempt to modify their radical plans that coexist with the amount of comfortably and most part of the iron-fisted leadership of this state now particularly demands reify the whole of capital as you check into how to an organizational structure with an organizational form of universal domestication maintain globalization of the set of resistance against capitalism the from feminism to ecology interracial little bit of these movements are single issue movements which do not the dimension of universality for this reason there's no normal revolution exposure card and exception and short circuit of two later to be a true realist we need to must consider breaking out of the change of what appears to be laws now climate adaptation for transportation structure is a neoliberal show which will be hijacked by corporate decision makers to make it easier to relocate manufacturing jobs and enable union busting and back up the effects of corporate black money through fully globalized offshore production and supply chains Goldstein in 12 economic orientation globalization of capital and channel change into more autonomous economic cycle regionally integrated longevity direction corporate decision makers will respond to climate change by using the power they use to shape and exploit the opportunities that see them close to the railroad but the important unit forces in the construction unit sharp with the part of the face of the increased use of non-equal and manufacturing to maintain the even deeper workers government matters will design the local machine running the machine building forms to learn to win country project Asia the Latin America the manufacturing footprint is like moving toward a regional economic focus on the transformation will require the many carbon investment decisions by businesses and their evidence that this firm are going to be created by the elites who would typically dominate the decision making and the region strategy attributed to the regional capital let's say they're going to say your important individual responses on based on a narrow church of response making difficult about the regional action to take common ground to the progress of climate adaptation of the alternative is to reject the after universally post-capitalism to embrace the catastrophe. Now we should be ceased with living in the world to an ideal future. The world is collapsing around only water rejection together the no choice flow can create change you can control that act well so you care especially after catastrophe occurred the catastrophe will come to the catastrophe is coming to the possible happening all around us instead keep your head cool but watching where you keep wait for you don't know what time will come now the economic downturn and social integration will left with the versus well growth around the globe like the idea that determined over in terms of the difference between the premise on terror out of the multitude waiting we should effectively renounce with the multitude of the messianic codings over the great rupture when the trends of the translated to new order the extraordinary accumulation must be some point transformed by strong limited light there is no feature of the tiger it's stopping the world of the violence evils here to save residents of the brutal upon the powers resolve the boundaries there is way too common condition of fixing our drug the drifting was against our insurance communism was too mutual against can order great producers after that we should fully assume this openness and shop is the non-transportation government text the United States government should invest in its adapting its non-evacuation infrastructure to the counterplan takes sufficient necessary pardon
Non-transportation.
Non-transportation infrastructure to climate change. The counterplan takes sufficient means to harden its after infrastructure to survive the impact of disaster and TTP in 2009 managed to maintain that assume that its repair and maintain infrastructure will be experienced to and protect and order these structures in the enhanced world of infrastructure building and shared production leaders above and enhancing natural weapons the critical infrastructure risk these same information in denial of adaptive infrastructure calculated minimums of denial of political participation how ad hoc and most rights disaster response to ensure social population cannot radically overcome only the counterplan of community resistance to mass bombs added from mistakes only on the waters of the city and only to remove from the neighborhood the existence of close and with superdome the track was filled with non-manufacturers and moved over the subtle of the demoralized bodies over 2,000 automobiles were abandoned with 350 but those left in the thing is subordination for space and time in which the heart is based on foundation will information they enable the sense of the distance of the day sense of the nation next up is the unfunded mandates counterplan takes the United States government should through an unfunded mandate investment in adapting to transportation structure to climate change that's all empirically proven man proving to the United States the course of the deposit of Washington security local governments whether the course of mandate state governments are able to get the governments of the states in the English policy and their running based on the political minds of the counterplan is the death of federalism super the unfundamental sources of federal government increases support for the state was on the support of the federal responsible was the state function allowed to be federal government sector support like north of federal state with fiscal relations ecological conclusion being federal government would do board and state for the host interest in return possession they cyclical reduction in state autonomy is difficult to justify any under any autonomy code theory model of federalism now that turns disaster relief China 2090 reluctant to do only to government reason to relinquish control of the further chaos and confusion compelling the emergency response to the devastating hurricane consequence the institution federalism local state authorities may be reluctant to turn responsibility dealing with emergency entities the federalism the responsible federalism collapses the power grid the New Yorker New York in 2009 federalism again was creation of a smart grid tuning current what the regional state governments create could national government attack and respond to the problems of the applicable also different versus defense all the way no power could which century with the problem we see in places where the money can reach a longer way the long way to simply building a grid or car overriding the system of grid collapse is inevitable without a smart grid 11 to 10 they're dependent on a federal commercial going to the high risk supply overload saving disaster terrorists the grid is responsible 99% of the power is back in other areas within seconds of the irreparable a branch or a sport the investment united related to simple innovation the reflex of a very proud plans of being more likely in Washington than severe and that causes a Shin Tilford in 12 the Judge Jack could take out could go with the US military backward with their agenda within hours around the PCC would go drugs to the grid system connectors that would shut down and contamination would go silent and weapons left around fuel power the short hours the most of the secretary defense area said that improving the grid have the most certain part of stuff that could be a full scale nuclear weapons of nuclear weapons on a case versus you can't defend representation that makes the affix or topical voting issue because it adds unpredictable affair that makes it impossible to enact in a second is there's a moral hazard the plan craze that makes the future disaster more likely sugar in between the nature of general public money assistance disaster is reduce costs of living disaster work region hands even some Republican individuals with themselves and promise publicly finance disaster relief rates more hazard that future catastrophe or produce more fatalities and property damage also bureaucracy federalizing disaster damage structure case lots of bureaucratic change to command a 10% effective response to your grid in agencies or bureaucracy field again the risk of version of the regional levels government is to engine one below the restriction of the restriction of people to separate make decisions are often several multiple layers what needs to be done who really wasn't know needs to be done the public the country was saying about confused changing command from the beginning to the top now there's no warming negative feedback checking impact relates
Status of the advocacies.
Status quo is an option.
Okay, cool. Is the K of
Critique is dispo.
the critique is dispo? Okay. The uniqueness evidence on politics says that Obama sank huge political capital into an effort to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill, but failed as his opponents whipped up claims he was pushing amnesty for illegal immigrants. This piece of evidence says that when Obama went to a Bush rally, or he tried pushing immigration reform, he used political capital to do so, but no one changed their vote. Who changes their vote in the status quo without the plan?
Well, he's got to get Republicans on board for the
Right, this evidence says that
right?
he's failing to
Second.
do that, so what changes?
Excuse me?
Right, Obama
Well, it's
failed
PCC
as opponents,
versus
whipped up
getting
claims
money.
he was just
Keeping Bush
pushing
on board,
amnesty
that's,
for limo.
increases momentum.
Right,
moving
obviously
Congress,
this isn't
correct?
part of like size 5 font. My question is just who changes their votes in the status quo?
Moderate GOP senators.
Why haven't they done so if
House.
Obama already used political capital on
And
them?
he needs to continue to use
Okay,
political
cool.
capital. It's about
where?
seeking to build support right now in the status quo, and he's got momentum.
Okay, on the K, where does the plan stop the disaster?
Where's the plan stop? The
Yeah,
disaster,
I mean,
but
what
he's-
part of the 1AC do you think says that we prevent a disaster from occurring?
It's not preventing a disaster. It's that the disaster itself, people seek to salvage what they had after the disaster, where they
Right,
seek
it says
to
that.
abandon what they have after the disaster.
Right, where do
I
we-
think her question is, what disaster are we trying to prevent?
It's not the preventing of a disaster.
No,
It's
what-
about what you do after the
No,
disaster.
because the
What
app isolates
disaster?
two different disasters. Which
I don't know
disaster
what
are you
this has to do
defining?
with the critique.
The natural disaster or the political disaster?
This question is completely irrelevant.
I don't think so. What is the link to this?
Well, there's a bunch of links.
Right, the
There's
first, the
check
Cohen
evidence.
card.
Excuse me?
Cohen.
One card's about alienation with nature. So our argument
Right.
is that the AF takes the position that the individual is what is being destroyed by neoliberalism rather than it's not, that nature is the one that's being destroyed and that hurricanes, the new normal, to alienate ourselves from nature and kind of try to subvert the population, move them away from natural disasters, instead when we should be fixing what the disaster of ecological.
I don't understand why that any of that is exclusive with the one I
That
see.
is because the Cohen evidence makes the argument that when you empower individual agency, you forget about the impacts of climate. It makes a placation argument that individuals.
Okay,
are
so I
placated
guess
towards their-
does the alternative for any of the links result in any part of or any transportation
The
infrastructure being
alternative does
built?
not reject infrastructure.
Does
Infrastructure
it does
exists.
so okay, right. Infrastructure still exists, like you don't destroy it. Do you allow for things such as evacuation routes to be created?
Like, it's
Does the
not
alt
really
allow-
abstract. Evacuation routes can exist.
So no, not can yes, they can exist. Are they created by the federal
The
government?
alternative does not fiat the plan.
Okay. The Goldstein evidence is about status quo transportation planners. How do they hijack? It's about status quo transportation planners. The point of the 1AC is that we remove the justifications they have for doing so. How do they still do that after the plan?
I don't think that you do. Why would you
Where do you read a piece of evidence on that?
The card makes the argument.
No,
right? So you read a
right,
plan
in the
for
status
absolutely
quo.
no reason, and I don't think that you should.
That's irrelevant. Also, how does the like act increase federalism?
App is not. The
Okay,
counterclaim kills
the
it.
counterclaim kills it. I understand that. So why? So is the only benefit to the counterclaim the federalism act? That was 123. Yeah, 836 left.
The card you censored me.
How do you sense it?
Check.
I'm just gonna get water.
That's fine.
Let's see.
My debaters back home telling me they're watching around, that I'm judging, I'm asking them who's winning.
Okay.
And 2C is different
It's-
response.
Yeah, it's right now it's
I don't know, man, if they said that the app was still winning, you're in deep trouble.
Okay.
It's like 7 saying the app is killing them, and 1 says the neg might have a chance. I don't know, that happens.
And there.
Hold on a second.
They don't want to hear you talk.
Yeah, the argument is, okay, here's the other tweet. Yeah, if the 2AC doesn't blow it, this is a lock. Yeah. No pressure on you. This is what the people around the world are saying.
Wow, they hate us. We do.
What is the name of this thing? 2AC,
Oh, speech
NDCA
2AC.
round.
No, speech 2AC Hooch KO.
Okay.
Let's see.
The order will be, it'll be the disposability advantage.
Abla,
Yes.
this is yours.
27 minus 40.
Thank you. You have 4 minutes left.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
for a minute 20.
47. Okay. It'll be the disposability advantage, the unfunded mandate counterplan, the second counterplan, the critique, and then the politics design.
Just leave the bucket. Pretty simple. That's true.
Okay, good.
Vacancy, the impact of gas disposability means millions of people die without transportation, ensuring that we do defend our agricultural lessons of discourse and plan implementation are inextricably tied, which means they're not actually shaped how policies implemented in the first place, which doesn't affect population disparity. Now, the moral hazard argument first, there's no impact. The argument presupposes a class structure when there's only a moral hazard in places that can't support themselves. The second, national adaptation strategy means we adapt all TI disasters everywhere. Third, the logic of disposability will still exist even if we let TI in those areas fuck up. The arguments are often defensive of the chain of command during Katrina. We are critiquing that their own cards have the response to Katrina. Yes, we agree with these are no ordinary read card on this board. Past the positive feedback threshold. Natural disasters are inevitable. He conceded that war will inevitably happen. Even if we shouldn't, we should still try to disrupt economies of life. This is the reason why all of our money to the academic lobby still applies. Count them. Doesn't solve the symbolic judgment. The state does not remedy the discoordination between federal government and states that only allows racism to flourish. That continues the logic of disposability. Only the one see discussion of economic black mass breakdown, the network capital structure that we solve the Schneck card, the lack of coordination for let's class. Not only federal coordination to overcome the significant barriers to adaptation announcement. 10. Federal loss company program regulation down the decision made by individuals companies. Not these programs regulation to serve about adaptation, not directed to reflecting conflict conditions, reflecting the financial support for the other interpretation true links politics. The plan still introduced in the conflict triggers backlash destroys the unfunded mandates, destroys the political impact of the account plan, just provokes anger of the money instead of advancing a substantive political discussion. That's Baltimore 214 though. When the federal government requires the state country to spend money on others, and local governments cry foul, federal government trying to coax state and local governments making position by offering federal government that money, and they should turn count into a game we place bets on people's lives. The state will hopefully resolve disposability. This is another instance of the economy's lack of federal government tried to clean its hands by dissolving responsibility to the state. This is the same thing that caused the crisis in the first place. FEMA was a shadow of itself because of cuts and cronies. Some states suffered mass deficits and lack of central support, which prevented them from filling in for FEMA. Federal government is key. That's program efforts also fight over jurisdiction, ensure continued racism in the class of the environment columns of 5 anti-urban racism and introduction to efforts to resolve contemporary environmental problems used around the racism and racist ideology offering economic living systems having been government impact of different state agencies increase our ability to look at the picture environmental indicators that again introduces show battles and triggers from adverse sustainable sharing community development and northern sustainable policy must be first is if no real environmental decision making in the first place also from the both links and that found defended mandates doesn't change the structure of federalism. Also the cases disad their focus on product of process destroys the process. So 106 the loss controlling person from the hope to create were detached from the product of the system was much realized in first place. Understanding the incapacity fit the loss of the active exposition to multiple from the product process ensure specifically the plasma product being replaced by the product. This product then becomes superfluous no longer especially when bound in commons about between the time and allocation office fairness should be reciprocal because the net education encourages argument and possibly our tradition as they get to dispositional aptitudes three dispositional aptitudes make standing moving target to AC can generate stable office gets unstable aptitudes kind of good just preserve and then get to practice argument and responsibility which is exactly what the staff code does and go to the internal and this has the 6 horsemen issues and national security are introducing the debate special plan back to back with the rhetoric of security should see folks away from natural disaster preparedness with the impact of low probability plan because then anything causing that loss travels and single battle action can't change it drastically means that this has not reverse cause law the unfunded mandates are and now first is education mandates control 145 country club we have the public schools nationwide 145 we talk about enormous unfunded and B is Medicaid expansion. We'll see 425 calling expanding Medicaid is a huge unfunded mandate. Now, C's levies not done for 424. New unfunded are expected to make the levy district thousands of dollars. No risk of encouraging that substantial enough to alter federal since Young 3 the states reverses autonomy as ordered in part years would be a long time forever for national government to change the federal balance. The impact is massively empirically done by multiple federal level projects, including the transportation infrastructure. Now, courts will check any snowball nickel when the court has the issues of rules of limit national government use establishing to only for state records to protect the autonomy of state government for congressional services, state government to instead of local courts command you for regulatory purposes. Now go to the camp when we are the by disrupting the economy of black and challenge from spending the liberal social unit disabled problems and the problem of council does nothing to resolve evacuation infrastructure. All evidence in the case of this is the only way people can physically leave the cities. Only hardening our asses does not resolve the issues of the investment needed for the evacuation infrastructure in the first place. Now evacuation infrastructure is necessary to evacuate people with disabilities as Hodges level transportation services preserve critical role in evacuation of the transit independent population role becomes more important as extreme weather events such are projects increasing opportunity. Population includes individual disabilities, older adults, low income population, person limited purchase of people, person living in households without vehicles. 10% use of households do not only encourage percent of various fairly within metropolitan areas and some high poverty neighborhoods, 44% more households have no corporate parents. Population reporting other agencies meet specific needs of population in terms of emergency with card and emergency mobility challenge the concept that infrastructure must only be built for purpose of utility. The act does not say the discussion of mobility is a discussion of political mobility. People can't form communities because they are deemed unable by institutions of power. If we don't create evacuation infrastructure, which means they can't solve the third advantage because we need to be able to mobilize populations and first social permutation of the plan. Then the economic permutation of both is double solvency go to decay. The affirmative must formally version of if the alternative can be floating if the perm, then the perm probably solves where the what is planetary systems of oppression, intellect, production, disposable economies of blackness, or the product of neoliberal policies you justify like now partition of the plan, reject forms of militarization. The discourse of inevitability is accurate. The alternative doesn't solve millions die in disaster. Now the discourse of catastrophe and disaster is necessary, whereas we also in terms of the associated discourse of catastrophe after and also fairly consistent and reasonable with the discourse of phenomenon climate change. The scientific community is not use substitute catastrophic and we would not be able to communicate accurate information with the degree of the rapidity and eminence of one another. Third can be really asymmetry use of charge down in form of scientific resistance, weak scientific communication, the basic threat to the public. Now the argument is metaphoric conversation for large and meant to overthrow capitalism. Usually 99 defines the core of the strategic gesture of democratic political subjectivization, combination to major opposition of position of force of demand for justice for reform of the accused function of metaphoric conversation to the event of global overthrow of the regime dealing with Russian communists wanted to play the vertical role of environmental difficulties again. They want to press most of it to explosive general context, reduce it to a little ring using global pressure practical strategy instead of focusing on particular problems of the plan of permutation to the plan incorporate the worldview. The alternative would be plan of permutation embrace the what you see non-competitive party alternative that solves best changing racialized family can solve any structural roots. They identify cold and 5D psychotic change the basic frameworks of hard times of cold and element can become a horizon paradox upon the basic structure while being a several interactive form. The horizon inconsistency and instability, but is rarely involved in the choice between changing path that leaves the horizon static or absolutely changing the fundamental horizon. Now their arguments are logical. Now versus the letter of the law specifically are a tactic of holding the law to its letter precipitates a crisis and legitimacy that threatens the disintegration of the entire Constitution 98. Those truly subversive not to describe the explicit letter of the law on behalf of the underlying concept that got the letter of the law fancy that sustains its ideology. Chief President letting us know what is politician right to be law alleged against the background of set upon rules most effective anti-ideological subversion of official discourse consistent reading and excessively little way this front of the set of unwritten rules. The part of unwritten rules now we've indicted methodology. You can't define what it means to be human beings. You should lose around because both populations are socially inaccessible. They don't have agency or inhuman. The one who sees a stance against the Eurocentricity of capitalism that they're also critiquing in the first place. Also extend the political the alternative is only possible in a world where the invisible bodies have become manifest in the first place. Now the denial of the active instructions, denial of public participation is not that solved. The third advantage of the all it's just another occupying Wall Street move that tries to take up and miss the floodwaters of the It doesn't result in material change. Also, the alternative opens the door to rampant neoliberalism, which increases suffering more. Robert 97. We have real social problems of deprivation, which only can be solved by state action by imposing such environment because they're carried out by the state action. So attacking the non-income neoliberals refusing to even monthly level equates to global neoliberal policy that the loss of people's the state power is drawn from certain areas of life and because we found arts opposed to how people starting out negotiate politics first. The seven important issues of national security are introduced to the push the plan back to the back burner, proves how crappy Congress continues to win a better reason why they're dissatisfied in the first place on no bill have been written yet. Hasn't Obama said those in the union that the plan will happen in a few months now. CIR does not account for women. New media foretold by advocates are calling for Congress to make pathway on such a criticizable sector of youth immigration. Publishing a majority are denying opponent. We need to include women in the vast majority of immigrant are gained for permanent residence in the United States through family-based visas. Now PC forces us to rank priorities and deem certain parts of society as expendable. The impacts of only see Ruby Saxo. The class approach to politics is for encouraging mental public policy. All of this rejected rank parties that are a little out of this way is that PCs can be influenced ranking problems, conservative influence of their narrow-minded approaches, holding cross-attending social programs that place labels of immediately affected with nothing for life and ignore disenfranchised braids forms of alcohol non-dual plan has components of immigration program required to solve the impact. Now Obama is lame duck peak fortune people president Obama's already on the shelf. The purple ratings have tumbled into towards the right person to defeat up proposed guns legislation into the present credit has also felt there's no real impact of this because it's both progressives.
Alright, so the app mobilizes populations to like fight against capitalism, correct?
That's not what the app specifically does,
Well,
but
like, what does the what
populations
evidence does
can
it-
collectively mobilize to resist capitalism if they
What
choose
evidence
to.
says that like populations will mobilize and like
The
resist
entirety of the
capitalism?
third advantage says that by restoring the political autonomy of certain black populations, they can collectively resist issues
Well,
that
it
they
seems
feel
like
desirable.
If I'm like a poor African American, right, I would, and it's like after the post-disaster scenario, right, I would more like want to stay in my home, correct, stay in like these areas, right, because that's kind of like what happened to Katrina, right?
Post-disaster, you probably wouldn't be in the disaster area, so I don't think that is a true argument.
So why can't we fix their homes instead?
What do you mean?
So
Because
like,
they would
if their home,
be
she just
destroyed by
interjected and
disaster.
said that home would be destroyed, right? The counterplan remedies that. I guess why is that not in itself a good thing?
The homes of people, you harden like.
So like the app throws the people out and onto the streets, right? So like that's kind of what it
No,
does.
that's the status quo.
So like disaster
Thrown out
occurs.
onto the street.
Disaster occurs, right?
Yes.
They don't have a home anymore. How does the app like get a person their home back?
Sure.
Essentially?
No. The argument is that we can allow communities to leave, and then once they leave, they're able to mobilize and
But they
coalesce
don't
into
have like
communities.
a home anymore.
No. The third
right?
advantage says that by allowing them to coalesce into communities, they sort of create their own like little society.
All right. Federal action being key. I guess why would states backlash against the federal government? Why is that? I guess why does that trade off with process versus product, right?
That's not the connection that we're making. We're saying
Well,
that
what's the
focusing
connection
on
there?
achieving the goals of the app without talking about the app the way we have done in the 1AC is
So like
uniquely bad.
the only way we can
The
do that
Agricultural
is read the
evidence-
entire app. How do we?
I mean,
do
essentially,
that? How do you
basically,
do
that's
that?
our argument. The agricultural evidence says that the way we speak about something affects its implementation.
Well, like I'm fast, but I'm not that fast. How am I supposed to be able to read the entire?
Well, there
1C,
should be an
right?
ethical
Consideration
reason
for the
to
counterplan.
support the counterplan.
Well,
Like, there needs to be an ethical
Why can't an ethical
discussion
reason be
within.
like extinction, right? Solve app, prevent
That's
extinction.
not.
Why is
well,
that not more
first of
ethical
all,
of an
that
option?
argument hasn't been introduced in the 1NC. Second, we would argue that extinction
Well, I'm
types
talking
of
about like the
capitalists
process
are
versus
just
product, right?
yeah.
So how does focusing on counterplan and on like competition, how does that trade off, right?
Yeah, we're saying your focus on that process, like how do we like resolve these issues
Why is
without
the negative
focusing on the way
focusing on
we
the
discuss and
process?
articulate these processes?
Why is the counterplan
is
to focus
necessary.
on that process?
Because you
want
never
the same
discuss.
outcome with
You never
that
dis-
benefit.
First of all, the agricultural evidence says that we need to disrupt economies of blackness. We need to step into public spheres and talk about them in order to break
Why
them
can't the
down.
counterplan
The
be
counterplan just goes,
disrupting
what
the
way can we
economies of
build
blackness?
evacuation infrastructure? That doesn't address any of the
It
arguments
seems like that is a
agriculture
way
was
to
talking about.
build evacuation
No, but it's not for
correct?
the purpose of doing that. Your
Yes, it
justification
agrees
for,
that the
no,
end
look,
product
here's,
is a
here's
good
where I
thing,
answer
correct?
your question correctly. The justification for the counterplan is the federalism net.
So it's about
The
justification?
justification for the app is
Well, it
disrupting
seems
the
like the
economies of
justification
blackness.
would be
That's the
justification. We
distinction.
solve F, also net benefit.
No,
so
justification for counterplan is
Wait,
reject
it
the
seems
app
like that's
for
my
federalism.
justification.
That is the
Put
justification.
disposable populations to the periphery so that we don't have extinction from like open grid meltdown. That's
towards the K than politics.
Then what?
Politics.
And this is 2 and C round 3?
Yeah. Hey, everyone ready?
Yes.
Conceded terminal impact to the critique that 1 year should not get new answers. Climate change and environmental destruction become the new normal. They're focused on introspection and the fungibility of individual bodies. Its solipsism ignores environmental destruction. The capitalism calls it single focus, makes the home secure, making people safe. That trades off with the child, changing the externalities of global warming. That way, the case extinction becomes inevitable. Fracking, tar sands, warming, sovereign debt, inequality, hyperconsumption, makes planetary extinction inevitable. The second is inequality is exasperated. Their in return destroys effective resistance to systems of power. External from the practice of bodies, genuine feeling for close confrontation against the overwhelming schemes of capital and consumption that robs ethics. Their integration of the black body into everyday life of neoliberalism causes worse psychological violence. Jordan 13 neoliberalism. The institutional policies conducted of the everyday life of the body, that level of the body and everyday life neoliberalization becomes an essential part of the constitution of new ones of government production. It becomes depoliticized subjectivity, constituting a system of borders for the state, the global competition, conduits, conduits, based on ontological and frequent entities, and individual conduct. Neoliberalization is the process of ontological violence which goes to the which does not merely govern the conduct of individual, but also infringe the all entities and elements used to market forces D by depoliticizing particular governmental rationality to globally unleashing the drive to inframe entities with geographers and spatial deferments. Also, particularly sensitive to the outcome, the aim is biopolitics, the mechanization. The first argument is the permutation, but this does not make much sense again when they can see the disaster raps like they should not get new answers. First arguments are about the way that we understand disaster, that they said that they're representing disaster as the logical endpoint of being destroys, but the ability for us to have resistance against is the sense of transforming the home, is the suicide of identity. The home does not exist without within, but it's a project external from the practice of bodies. The app placates transformative politics by improving human agency, teaches people to run away from their existence and run away from nature instead of trying to challenge the everyday consumerism that they are stuck defending. It means a permutation is not an option. It's not a floating pig, but rather an argument about why the affirmative takes a bad approach. The plan text is what we disagree with. We do not think that changing infrastructure or adapting it will be able to change anything. Instead, that what he sees is actually a pretty good advocate for us, says that the way that we understand representations of disaster is enough to change politics itself. It says that we can form coalitions as long as we open up spaces under our understanding of disaster. We fundamentally disagree with how you represent a disaster. So instead of representing it as the end, the fear of all existence, the end of being, we should represent it in romance. So we should romanticize disaster and accept the catastrophe. Or it goes permutation to the plan and reject militarism is intrinsic. There's nothing about the alternative that rejects militarism, but the one he sees is an 8-minute critique of corporatized transportation infrastructure. The plan is to make the system more resilient. The climate change that caused the is an incoherent double turn. As much as they will try to characterize solvency around the interrogation and reinvestment, in reality they do absolutely nothing to change the overall system. They're often criticized. In fact, they only grease the wheels of corporate production by implementing a top-down strategy which can be co-opted and manipulated by corporate interests to fracture the possibility of autonomous resistance. That is our guilty evidence specific to transportation investment. They have zero coherent response on the mechanism level, which is gained over. Second is particular demands against coercive oppressive state practices or a revolution without a revolution. Single issue movement straight off with the universal approach because the states can compound individual movements and replace it with something worse like the Jim Crow laws or the 88th medical definition of disability. The early 20th century women's rights movements and civil rights movements co-opted each other to create tensions between what each individual group wanted that accomplished and killed the civil rights movement for years to come to be absorbed by capital Zizek evidence. And also any link turns case neoliberal approach to climate adaptation failed. Goldstein in 12 moments hierarchical external integration fosters individual corporate abilities in the soft effects as a retail decline isolation for protocol and adaptive strength place these rootedness and argument the external integration of the fosters innovation while and through economic contribute to adaptive sustainable regional development. This latter path will be forced to start representation that representative of capital and perceive the pursue the opportunities according to capabilities and class interests in the myriad of forms of influential to shape the way the regions of adaptive path and their own images up to the working class environmental movements and force them to debate around climate adaptation due to terrain more favorable for sustainable regional development. Their argument about disaster representations is about something about how we can inform climate change movements in the abstract. Our argument is not that agency is good, but rather agency is denying of agency PC is denying of coalitions in the first place. The necessity to escape disaster is depoliticizing to those people. They say metaphoric condensations. This makes no sense against our alternative because you cannot condense something that is neoliberal into a strategy against neoliberalism. Our argument is that the ideological kernel of infinite progression and infinite consumption is held within the ideas of infrastructure itself, which means the affirmative cannot be part of that. They say fermentation new plan in the world of the alternative. I'm not sure what the world of the alternative is, but it is to embrace the catastrophe and romanticize disaster itself and universally oppose capitalism. The permutations coalitional stance to the ecological struggle fails. First, it creates austin binaries, and second is democratize the transportation infrastructure, which flips solvency for early 11. It is ignorance of realities against the ecological struggle to equate aspect that hurts as much as the ecological movements are like Don Quixote masking the target to the comment that is pathetic and deadly. When you see Paris, what you see with the countryside that no longer exists any more than the inside and outside exists for our prisoner. The more sustained confrontation for the localization, the damage of disaster, the damage and disaster occur just as the emergence of war nihilistic specter of the speed has no name who cannot be named after the nonetheless arrived the democratization of transportation infrastructure led to the crime of desolation and absenteeism, desertion of the place in the channels of transportation in Italy was a country with the highest rate of absenteeism in Europe, and before topping all other nations were in a state of insecurity only killed to be killed fairly. Transportation is not the first step in this climb. Doesn't as long people live with the disaster of cleansing the neighborhood. The neighborhood is the weakest. The only problem that you get is one poor black spitting onto the schools and the homes of population. The transit system, New Orleans public sphere was lost when it was rebuilt and began to be arisen after the storm was used as an excuse. Large swaths of the United States were lost their manufacturing bases deteriorated due to the rust belts of the Charlotte factories, neglecting neighborhoods. New Orleans providing the western image of the world and a new kind of voice in urban landscape. Once he climbed up and see the kids of the dichotomies that they try to solve, which is the ToC number 6, does not really work. It says that the moment after a disaster is made for ideological critique and instead of exposing to infrastructure regimes that connect neoliberal cities, and said we should begin a pointed praxis to disengage with neoliberalism itself. They say the arguments are illogical because of some sort of letter of the law argument. Their plan does not change the state, it only leads it to be co-opted even more. That's their author in 11. Some that seeking in the name of ethics and multiplicity and the world of relation precedent that being detailable governability guided by the desire to maintain jurisdiction convenient itself much that the organization takes temporal breaks for the grant of the interrupted and passing into the breadth of discrete temporalities. Time is in turn reducing time to a succession of instances to quantify the rupture is never examined long enough to rather irretrievable gas focusing on the process must be decentralized if we are to defatalize the present to constitute multiple worlds and political action against its statement colonization and the existential elimination. The present emerges under vulnerable space out of the imagination back to the captive politics reanimates the dead of the breath of paper to invest in radically different temporal existences. They analyze how people and things are transformed, how bodies inhibit themselves and squares they look the global uprising and intervene in the repressive backwards of our being saying is divide the global that lies in the interest of structural ontology. We deem it important to ask about the production of the global. What does it look like at the time of the global? Whether the global and the world itself this is to be resisted. These such becomings are the time of temporally structuring them. They say the disposable populations have no agency. Our argument is that when you provide them agency through an infrastructural regime, you provide them the wrong kind of agent, the wrong kind of agency to be involved in a political system that fails for them. The only people that show up to the coalitional arguments are the people from the Tea Party, NAPIC, and 7, because the citizens participants are not paid up by committees that are not strongly partisan participants who live in the whose life is strongly affected by those who live comfortably enough to participate and given the limits of representation. There's no guarantee that the participants are adequate proxies for the community, even if the diversity. This makes it more difficult to at least to participate in policy decisions and starts tonight. The demands that take their arguments about personal agency are ultimately depoliticizing her shocking identity. More successful legislation becomes the word of itself and unnecessary. The legally based social activism is reliable, effective in tradition and necessity for protocols maintaining time to generate the limits of discrimination, distinguishing movement, and direction is equivalently unsharp, and the apathy of dramatic potential, limit completely freedom of choice would not be elimination of the influence, the meaningful improvisation, but rather an erasure of the latter's illusion of possibility mark, and possibility that what he sees is a critique of Eurocentrism, and we agree, but not in the correct manner. They say political participation, the impact turned that above. They say no material change. Obviously, the alternative does not result in material change like the plan does. Beyond is not real, only the flaming of disaster matters. That's their own one. You see, eventually, when the evidence, the method by which they create disaster should matter a little bit more. They've conceded the client evidence that says the ideological kernel of capitalism is only displaced in a moment after a disaster, which means that we are necessitated by moral obligation to reject that. They say the plan that it costs more neoliberalism. This says that we should affect an artificial installation to the state. That's not possible. You don't change anything in the state anyway. The plan just goes back to that. Politics not going for it. Concede PC not real.
What does the alt defend, and how does it resolve the links?
It's a universal opposition to capitalism, and the way that we do that in the context of your app is to accept catastrophe.
Why does that re-articulate disaster?
The Zizek evidence that we read in the 1 and C indicates that the articulation of the disaster that you presented is that neoliberalism is the disaster of the end. So, for example...
No, the articulation that we presented was necro-capitalism is bad. Where do your cards make that distinction?
The argument is that when you present something as the tropology, kind of the tautological ending of
existence, it is denying and
Where does the app say
depoliticizing.
that that's the only thing that, like,
Are you serious?
yeah.
When I asked you in 1AC Cross-X, you said the disaster is not ecological, the disaster is necro-capitalism. Our argument is that
Yeah.
I didn't say it's not ecological.
Why does that
It's a
necessarily
disaster
mean it's the
isolated
end
by
point
those.
of all, like,
our argument is that well, 1AC has
hierarchies?
presented a very clear statement that the end point of existence is the disposable body and the black body that has been excluded from capitalism.
Sure, so what is
Our
the
argument is
distinction
that
with the
instead of-
critique?
That depoliticizes agency by saying that is all that you can live to, kind of like the social death turn that a lot of people read against Wilderson. But our argument is that to romanticize a disaster is to accept that catastrophe is always already coming towards us and instead live with catastrophe.
So live with capitalism.
Not live with capitalism, live with catastrophe.
What?
Our argument is that that
Well,
universally
I guess I
opposes
don't
capitalism.
understand because you define catastrophe as neoliberalism, so we should live with neoliberalism.
No, I never defined catastrophe.
Yes, you did. So what is the catastrophe?
The catastrophe is a lot of different things.
What is it?
Our critique says that you should not define catastrophe as one thing.
All right, so what exactly does the alternative reject?
The alternative accepts all of those catastrophes.
So we should live with neoliberalism, racism,
Not-
capitalism,
again,
everything
to accept
that exists.
catastrophe does not mean to live with things, but it is to accept that these things are inevitable.
So I don't
and try to
understand,
challenge
the
them at a
alternative
macro level.
is to reject capitalism. Why is that not
Universally.
another instrument of a catastrophe?
The acceptance that capitalism is inevitable is a prerequisite to macro level change. So your argument is trying
Your
to
alternative rejects it.
right through a macro level change. Here's a micro level change, and that's the
That's
distinction
fine.
valuable.
Where does Agathangelou go next?
The argument is that creating zones of exception, even in places that you move people to, is also creating an ecological timescape or a teleological timescape where people are only lived to go one to another place.
What does that mean?
So you exist to escape a disaster, and when you escape it, you go to another productive city.
All right, that's fine. The Jordan evidence, where do we integrate the black body into the neoliberal order?
That's the entire argument. So like
We
instead
don't,
of-
that
Yes.
seems like it assumes that we would make black bodies productive, like we need to use them for jobs.
No,
Where does the
that's
1AC take
not
that
what the evidence
stance?
says. The evidence says that to rely upon the body for political change is depoliticizing because you view them only as an instrument for political change.
We just said that they
not
can
as
organize if
anything
they
else.
want. Why does that mean we're using them as
Your
tools
answers
for
to
political
the
change?
critique are very like descriptive.
We said that they can mobilize. That's not political change.
We're gonna take a second.
Space colonization.
Do you guys have a flash drive? It's on there.
I give it, that's when you threw it.
Yeah, the one I threw doesn't have it on it, but the one I gave you that has it.
Space colonization. No, the 1AC was disaster. Alright, what are we talking about here?
Unfunded mandates and non-evacuation timeline.
Okay, one second.
You. Abu. Steve.
Actually, what did you do? 500.
Toss it to me, Adam.
Yes, sir. Drumming is majorly annoying.
It's not there.
Yeah.
Alright, so what's it called here?
1 an hour around 3 ToC. Still not there.
If you can't find an egg.
No, I'm sure I can get it down, to be honest. Got it, wait. Ones. Twos. Three.
Trogdon, slow drag.
Okay. Good. Cool.
Unfunded mandates not going for no permutation. Also, there's no office conceded there. Backlash against negative arguments reached by FEMA. Some such companies that current federalism means that states will backlash against what FEMA and what the United States tries to do something on process. The process versus product does not apply to the counter non-conditionality. The counter interpretation, 2 conditional options in 1. This 1 or 2 from examples or broad range options. 3 conditional options able to solve it. Force them to be all conditional through permutation tricks. And the 2 it does not solve testing of the alpha options or interpretation investment that teaches nuance after the introduction of ideologically diverse arguments. Forces the intimate the political middle ground defeating the left. In very tough place requires nuance, often not political. Treatment that teaches real world skill. I'm going to defend healthcare from the left. And the right now, second is that it fosters argument innovation because debaters are risk conditionality key to different options. 3 stages what forms of education and process. And the decision arguments to read is critical to developing the affirmative development is where you should err. Make all question theory because the opposite input about the 2 errors reactive. And versus the years 1 of 5 no, there's no excuse because there nothing but permutation feed DS and job violation reaction 2. There's no contradiction. You can see double trade and take out negative offense, not to the manufacturing education counterplan. We are a better interlink to the community to build in the 1 and C. Adaptation gets that bodies become demobilized when cars were left behind and whether that was because that was a fundamental problem with Christian and cross-supply argument that they cause a moral hazard because people desire more money and they put themselves in harm's way for disaster. Scenario disaster reasons these calls for the affirmative calls for evacuation of plane are inherently left denied. The story of the LGBTQ plurals of groups arguments calls for evacuation of disaster protection are simply a part of a game of political football for elitists to justify exploitation. Not been Newman in 123 I hate people starving evacuation to describe the age of her people are being rescued with the natural disaster. People are being kicked out of their homes, forcibly removed, dispossessed, brutal electricity bulldozers are down. Age of her was even more place because the bulldozers found much of the land. The failures only fall out extra, hoping the bulldozer would some spread about morning postponed demolishing was going in the morning. The other matriarch was asking for money. The woman has no money. She was in wish she had a poison to serve her family instead of ones that was barricades created and heated. After putting various families who had been removed, made distributing water, food and money is difficult. I met a doctor. She's probably typically quite healthy, but there are now diarrhea, hepatitis, and jaundice problems with thyroid blood pressure because people are exposed to the cold air and feeling so much smoke from the fires burning away to stay warm. And have a place like politician business to continue like political football with their political football. People have. Now he says that she says that we that they are the critique. They do not do anything because they take the economies of blackness and literally throw them out on the streets and they tell them to do their own thing. They kick them out of their homes. They do not foster whatever the communities are. 1 and NTPP evidence indicates that we actually allow people to survive and thrive because we go through an investment in non-evacuation infrastructure and hardening that infrastructure able to increase the reliability and maintenance of current planes. Now their over-reliance on their plane costs is over-reliance. That means disasters are unbelievable and evacuation inevitably fail. What should they tell? In proper evacuation of nature, disrupted depends on politically sensitive issues. It's not possible to determine exactly which geographic areas will experience severely harsh conditions. The consequence of overly large evacuation include potential overstretching the transportation system and possibly reducing access. Those who are most at risk and most need of evacuation will also drop some evacuation activity over the large region. Excessive evacuation will have the potential of creating a cry. Wolves in their transmissions in the United States are generally able to build large numbers of people to significant distance in a timely and take manner located from a high as a coastal on creating overwhelming and unmanageable conditions and traffic and evacuations are deadly and undermine the credibility of disaster agencies. BBs.org in 2012 that evacuations can be deadly, more victims die. Relieving evacuation, displacing evacuation can be a waste of time that undermines the credibility of government's ability to call for the evacuation or best, expensive, and stressful. Worse yet, they are sometimes deadly and swarm evacuees. They say that the plan helps those who are disabled. The plan focuses on mobility and focuses on those who are immobile and ignores those who can't get out of the city. Only the county is able to resolve that. Evacuations reduce faith in the government, hurt the disabled. Fair Child to Tell in 2006 made it our evacuation was cost individual and business impending disaster failed to materialize these. Includes long work and the spend for gasoline, launching and fair evacuation was temporary. Depending upon evacuation was special risk to the ill and disabled and against the hospital population. The rates were treated was not they were harming and more they were moving them. They're not now. Evacuation is not sufficient to help them. Walsh and Tell in 2005 evacuation was not the appropriate response to all disaster. Evacuation would be only the appropriate taking the aftermath of the disaster. The affected by the disaster would tend to be increased in size as one progresses. Then people needed there more people usually affect longer distance return risk or in order to avoid the danger. The plan would have its desired effect. Walsh and Tell in 2005 and in some cases the responses were not able to complete all of the questions that selected to the department also agency have jurisdiction over various parts of the evacuation process change rate of occurred to the link between survey and publication results. And she says that you need to mobilize the mobilized population for the entire counterplan is an impact for this introduction to mobilization. There are double term because they though they want to cause the immobile to be disposed of and left out of their politics creates hypervisibility. The impact is racism and exclusion. That inevitably turns case Berger and Corcoran in 2007 hypervisibility report coverage of the neuronally segments of the complaint of the stereotype black neuronally made acceptable of suffering was increased legal racial racializing keepers gave us a word of them but gave the party get away blacks and hurricane to work through the visual black and poverty and predicus identical lines to reveal the government's role in fostering the American large board African Americans who have bring the hearts of urban rest with your offensive ability to work in racism the names clear the races are racialized continue to show their offering emphasis as in fear of many of projects. Now permutation duels doesn't really make sense because it links to all the net benefits.
Evacuation is bad. Permutation includes that. If it doesn't, it severs. That's a moving target. Makes the ToC moving target. You should reject that.
We have 727.
the soccer matches?
Okay, cards.
Same.
I can't do commentary.
We can do it.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to keep your computer? Do you want to put it?
No, it weighs like 3 ounces.
Just as like, I could buy 10 of these computers for the price of one of those computers.
Nice work.
Okay, it's gonna be the non-TI pick,
You want?
Yeah.
then states, and then
Non-TI, unfunded, okay. Just the order.
I think we said it correctly.
If you didn't, just guess.
Smell good to you?
Non-TI states.
Oh, my bad.
Well, no, it's been lights.
Why did Ron call it sleep?
It's not starting. It's not science. You tried so hard.
Alright. I love the 1AR that reads 400 cards. This is great. Oh, that's the 1AC. Damn, I can't remember.
I think I read mine.
What's the 1AR? What do you
Round 3 when I air cards.
There's 2 here.
No, I read 9 in the 1AC.
Ooh.
Non-funded.
Aren't you cool?
No, it's like.
We're good.
Just let me know when you have it.
Got it.
Good. Permutation people that contain evidence indicate that elderly, sick, and disabled did not have access to transportation infrastructure, which means that the permutation both encompasses their narrative because it means that people can evacuate if they want to, but it also means that their homes are not destroyed. There's no moral hazard. That evidence is about the status quo. They're still disaster zones. Probably means that people wouldn't want to move there. Now, their enough evidence aids our argument. They are kicked out and brought. It indicates that people are kicked out of their homes. Yes, they are kicked out of their homes in the status quo and brought to the Superdome so they can be monitored so they don't shoot on sight on federal officers. Their Wilson evidence is bad, and it's in the context of forcefully making people use evacuation routes. You should filter the way you view this counterplan through what their evidence is. All of it is depicted about making people forcibly move. The plan does not forget that, and no part of the 1AC takes a stance on making them. We just allow them the possibility to it. Their evidence clearly does not for disabled people. Also, their levies.com evidence says that people died because they were displaced. Yes, now outlets are arguing the plan for us. Their evidence says that evacuation routes are bad because they decrease credibility of the government. We will concede that. That is a reason. The plan is good. We need to decrease the credibility in the face of the government so that they lose their justifications for continuing to have these segregated death zones and economies of blackness. None of their answer to the disability add-on makes sense. We don't mandate evacuation. Their Wilson evidence is just as insufficient. That is not a reason to do it. Some is better than none. You say someone's their wall, their piece of Wilson evidence at the bottom just says that agencies have jurisdiction over existing evacuation routes. That doesn't make sense because our argument is that people in segregated death zones don't have transportation infrastructure or evacuation routes in the first place. States or unfunded mandates. FEMA failed because funding the plan solves that. Also fails some jurisdictional letters. Our argument was that states don't have jurisdiction in the federal control, which means that there won't be any fighting because federal regulation over solves go to the K. The extinction is not that they can see that structural violence out. Actually, also back to the counter plan, the first one. The affirmative is a much more nuanced of their spectaculars, increasing the access to the health of law, disposal of disaster, use of black body as a spectacle of violence. That's a reason that gives the government a warrant to mobilize those zones by interrupting that logic through adaptation measures that evacuation. There's no violence in those areas post-storms, which means that the hyper-visibility arguments don't make sense. Black are already hyper-visible because they are the first ones who are put on the forefront for death. Okay. Extinction of an applicant see that structural violence outweigh now status quo policies to mess up the impacts of the population who cannot access TI, cannot form community coalitions to advocate their policies. They all cannot remedy these racist policies, which turns their advocates because it's a maintenance of the status quo. Only by restructuring policy can we target injustice. Now they have not answered the concept of disposability only by unveiling the populations that are affected by calculated political disasters that open up space to resolve questions of race, class, gender, and all population. Now permutation of the plan and the ocean of the 1AC is a more nuanced version of the K. They can make a concede a few fatal arguments. One is the risk of evidence says that we must use the discourse of inevitability to prevent mass deaths because they create a necessity for action. action. Part of this is also removing the justification the state has for spatially segregating death zones. Disaster is a political, not predicted, not idea of natural disaster. Also, it's not exclusive. Perma allows them both to be encompassed. There's no sequence. There's no co-optation argument. There illegio evidence doesn't make sense because democracy because we read evidence on the common evidence. Someone like Sandy indicates that democratizing TI is good because it reconfigures TI from its militarist capital usage to a means of collective mobilization. The plan is not an ecological struggle. Connolly says democratic speed is key to engagement. Anti-speed targeting results in fascism and the worst form of scapegoating minorities. Now they have also conceded the close-up and says that the permutation is necessary to overcome the climate changes. It never will happen. Doesn't change the case. Now we don't need to integrate black body into the life of neoliberalism. We disrupt neoliberalism the way it exists now. The plan text is solves we have to create transportation infrastructure and now must work within the system to create change. William 70 is a Roman city that connects to the political system, self included legislation, militates and revolution, the militates from within. It is pressingly imperative that our people enter the vital organs of the establishment and infiltrate the system. Their alternative increases human suffering and abandon strategic strategies that chip away state power. Chomsky, HK, the master school never use master the centralized power is not going to willingly commit suicide. That doesn't mean you shouldn't chip in a way benefits suffering people that some of them you should always be done no matter what the consideration to sit in academic seminars to talk about how the future is. Now we replicate political disaster. We represent disaster as a political disaster that instead comes at the expense of solving economy's blackness. The Grossberg evidence in their greed is about status quo co-optation. And what he removes is because one, the government doesn't have the justification, but two, Brown's public support there. This is an illiberal climate change that they conceded. The adaptation and adaptation says that communities can only exist right now because there's no access to infrastructure. We don't intervene like yes, we change disaster misreading of the adaptation evidence change the way that it is defined in the status quo against the plan does that political strategy fails in the status quo. This is our argument. We reorient the political and the way politics in America works. They created their own community coalitions. Their caliber evidence is about the fear of catastrophe. That's not what the 1AC is. It's a re-articulation of disaster, not as a Hurricane Katrina, but as Hurricane Bush. We don't fear it. We just prevent it from coming. They also concede that DeLand has no all solvency because capitalism is a buzzword that intellectuals and people who implement plans can't interpret.
Okay, then the counter. Everybody ready?
A couple of conceded arguments makes it a really easy negative ballot. They concede the framework for the debate to carry the way the 1C represents disasters. There's a technical drop of the 1 ER. A framework agreement at the bottom of the flow of the 2 ER definitely does not get you answer. This should protect the 2 ER, especially with the 1C card. Is very explicit about why the articulation of disaster matters. Secondly, is that they concede the alternative solve the entirety of the heat. The catastrophe is inevitable happening around us all the time. The act is a strategy to keep your cool and just wait for the next big catastrophe. The alternative is a renunciation of the myth that is embracing a daily catastrophe. Suffering and violence are here to stay, and only by acknowledging that we arrive at the fixed point of the president. The story of the Gibber, the one bar is actually pretty good at this. Says that the evacuation routes that were created by the transportation planners are only a political football game that moved to another neoliberal state. The extinction is inevitable. There's no warranted answer to this in the 1 ER, just the words to answer this. Our argument is that the alienation from nature means that we think that environmental destruction becomes okay. We just flee the scenario, the places where disaster happens, and say that we can be okay there somewhere else. Our argument is a placation of what actually exists as a disaster. That's our 1C code evidence. This argument is conceded by both the 2EC and the 1 ER, but I don't think they should give you answers to. The only argument is the disposability and some sort of argument by the act turns this argument, but our arguments about the representations of disaster itself, the idea that representing disaster is the endpoint of humanity, that the fungibility of the black money ends in the neoliberal capitalism, and ultimately agency denying prevents the coalitions that the act wants and they want to build up, because when you tell people that they have no agency, when you tell them that they have no ability to fight back against the power of capital action, giving them some experience for dictators from the government is the fact that the top-down planning that are gold scene evidence or 1C influence evidence criticizes. The problem that we have with the 1C is not their articulation of disaster is bad, because we fundamentally agree that disposability of population is bad, but the fact that they use the plan in order to placate the population and tell them that it is okay as long as they can just evacuate from the zones of disaster is what we're critiquing. Their own adventure evidence rights article in 2011 that kind of critiques the entire option of the teleological timepiece. It said that when you advocate disaster as the end of space, the end of existence, creates another zone of exception or the beginning of existence, that internally turns the entirety of the criticism of permutation links to all of our arguments, especially when the 1 ER has conceded a particularism link that 1C evidence indicates that single issue movements trade off with universal opposition because the state can compound individual movements very easily. For example, the Jim Crow laws of the ADA medical definition of disability were put in place when the single issue movements tried to argue against the state. The 20th century represents a bunch of different political movements like the women's rights movements and the civil rights movements who co-opted each other because of tensions that occurred as individual groups wanted to accomplish larger macro level institutions. Their micro political changes is what we criticize. There's no extension of metaphorical condensation in the 1 ER, which makes it impossible for them to win. Second is that the infrastructure itself is neoliberal. Evidence indicates that they reinvest in absolutely nothing to change the overall system. They're all just criticized rather than they just grease the wheels to corporate production by implementing a top-down strategy that was explained about the story of the Gibber and all the Eastern arguments of the 1 ER reads protecting the cross like here because they're all advocates for why the criticism is a better strategy. The permutation does not solve anything because the alternative is universally opposed capitalism and romanticize and accept the inevitable catastrophe, which means the permutation is mutually exclusive, but the alternative is mutually exclusive with the affirmative. They say there's no co-option. Our argument is that you co-opt yourself. Your invocation of agency is ultimately agency denying. That was above their 1C. The Calvin Phillips evidence, they also don't form coalitions. They conceded the first piece of evidence that said that remember the town halls and the healthcare reform in the summer of 2009, they were dominated by Fox News, watching idiots who screamed for death panels, people who show up for the act's movement into liberation, whatever will be great to conservatives who are deeply motivated, or people who can afford at the same time for work ensures that it fails to actively represent the act constituency. Second is the Hooch evidence indicates that their arguments about personal agency are ultimately conservative and depoliticizing arguments for localizing activism within the purview of social location are equivalent to privatizing social change, creating us as a dependent to necessity of their advocacy forces a tokenized world of debate where the most successful the more damage it does by making the institutions necessary to our understanding of social change. The state will go up. That second finally is the Beryllium argument, the Klein argument, the moment after disasters where the ideological kernel takes place and they replace it with transportation infrastructure that democratizes it and allows it to exist and inevitably creates an
inside-outside paradigm where some people are allowed on it and some people are not. If it's true that forced evacuation does not happen, then voluntary evacuation will not work in any form, in the way or fashion. That's our really applying evidence, which take a lot of their permutation arguments and the two new cards and one arguments are not really applicable. The first argument is about how we need to use the will, we need to use the state. Our argument is that maybe the state can be good, but the way the F targets the state to mobilizing the agencies and ultimately self-denying and the coalitions they build are bad. They say they need to use the master's tools. That may be true, but the way that Maloney uses the master's tools are bad. They also concede a framework argument, which the alternative does not matter much. Only the one he sees that representations of disaster are bad. They very conceded argument, which makes it impossible for the two argument. They say that we represent the one political as they saw the status quo walked in. Obviously not. They made a lot of different arguments about. They have no evidence that quantifies this argument to particular resistance or to our specific arguments about the invocation of disaster and agency denial. In that case, now, yeah, the rest of the arguments are really not new. The only argument was the one year sped up, something about capitalism. This wasn't an argument. Capitalism is not a buzzword. We accept disaster. It's a very different alternative, not the last debate, not transportation counterpoint. Not going for it, but all the offense is still offense.
Very good, me too.
a catastrophe is inevitable, and accepting it inevitably not only justifies the countless deaths during the natural disasters and people can't leave, but also the political disaster which allows the USFG to remilitarize these zones to prevent uprising and resistance towards the government, which none of their link evidence assumes that universally opposing capitalism is just inconsistent with the acceptance of the catastrophe, because none of their evidence rises to the threshold to make a distinction between micro and macro micro and macro issues. In the first place, the single issue argument does not make sense, because if we're going to a single issue only, once the evidence indicates that we give people the ability to collectively mobilize and create resistance for themselves, they don't advocate for a single issue, but rather the transportation infrastructure gives them a means to advocate for a multitude of issues which means we solve their universalism argument. They say evacuation of political football, yes, it is a political football for the neoliberal agenda, but the app is not the neoliberal agenda, because we break down the way the neoliberal policies work in the first place by creating these crises of legitimacy where the federal government does not have a justification for intervening in these zones of sacrifice. Now, there are multiple words for why are called these things, but they're all evidence of permutation. First, the Adams evidence is the only way we can materialize demands and create that crisis in the USFG that makes tactical engagement more effective is through adaptive infrastructure, which the alternative does not do. Now, second is the Chomsky parenthesis, the idea that we can't use the master tools to break down the master's house is nonsense, because the USFG will never just commit suicide, but we can chip away at the system. This is vital because they're all in framework laws, and also suffer while we debate in academic seminars. And C is the Williams evidence. We must infiltrate the system to effectuate change. We must enter the organs of the institution, bring pressure from within in order to create a ripple in the modernity of America. They see single issue, but it's already answered that the apps not single issue, which means we resolve. They say the academic love is still negative. The academic says the disaster in the context of political calculus is bad. That type of disaster framing is bad. We re-articulate what the disaster means, and by shedding light on what the federal government's atrocity, they say TI is neoliberal. That is irrelevant. That is not what the app does. The app doesn't use TI for neoliberal policy. The third bench also speaks to this because we use it for collective mobilization. The reject capitalism argument I already answered. It seems the alternatives incoherent. They say we create conservatives. We only create the ability to collectively mobilize. The people don't go to meetings. They create their own meetings, which allows them to create effective forms of resistance. Also, he doesn't articulate what the framework is or why you're after bad truth. You should hold the academic framing. Now they say
He dropped framework.
he says we dropped framework. We did the academic evidence says a re-articulation of what disaster means, absent how politics is currently framed. Disaster is necessary. That's why we resolve what the state is never what we must work for a minute.